Well, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Ken Luciak, and joining me today is my co-host Todd Stout. Today's webcast is titled The Four Lenses of Leadership for Improvement. The objective of today's webcast is to learn from the work of Dr. Edwards Deming, in particular the four lenses that make up Deming's system of profound knowledge. We have with us today Mike Taigman, who I'm very excited to have, and he'll be explaining to us those four lenses and show us how to activate them to lead meaningful improvement.
Hi everybody, I am Mike Taigman. I'm with FirstWatch as their improvement guide, and here with the Canadian Chiefs to talk about the four lenses of leadership for improvement. This is all based on the work of Dr. Edwards Deming, and he referred to it as his system of profound knowledge, which is his collection of all of his improvement science and leadership wisdom over the course of several decades, put together into a single four-lens system that has appreciation of a system, building knowledge, understanding variation, and psychology as its components. And I have found over the years that EMS leaders who have the ability to think through these four lenses when looking at their system, looking at projects, looking at issues to improve, do a much better job at producing the kind of results they hope for. So we'll dive in and start first by talking about appreciation of a system. A system is all of the component pieces that you're trying to manage and execute. One example that people sometimes refer to is if you had a cow and you took a chainsaw to the cow and cut the cow in half, how come it doesn't result in two little cows? The reality is EMS systems are very similar. There are interdependent aspects of call taking and dispatch and training and education and human resources and finance and fleet management, all that need to come together in order to be able to execute our mission of taking good care of people who are sick and hurt. So a system is a series of interdependent processes that are focused on a purpose, and it's important to understand and be clear about your purpose up front. For instance, if you've got an egg and your purpose is to create a cake, you're going to design a different set of processes and a different system than if your purpose is to produce a rooster. Very different uses for the egg in this case. All systems are perfectly designed to get the results that they're getting. So when you think about your system and your system design and think about issues and problems and whatnot, it's always a good idea to stand back and look at your system and its design to see how things work. And I'll give you an example. Back in the early 1990s, I was working in San Mateo County, California, just south of San Francisco, with a team that had taken over the 911 system there. And as part of our startup, we had taken out a bank loan of $5.5 million to finance our initial operation. And one of the challenges is the bank doesn't really understand EMS financing, so they didn't understand why some people we billed and they didn't pay us the full amount, or we accepted assignment from Medicare and those kind of payment systems here in the United States. So they got frustrated and were wanting to have their loan repaid faster than what had been agreed to. So we were looking for a different source of financing in order to be able to float us through until our revenue caught up with our expenses and we could fund ourselves. So at a management meeting, our CEO, Sharon at the time, asked us to hold off on any extraordinary expenses if we could for a little while until we secured our new financing. And if there was a way we could help save a little bit of money in the short term, that would be appreciated. And one of the people who was in the circle was the person who managed our supplies, all of our disposable medical supplies and inventory and those kinds of things. And he went back to his office after the meeting, and there was a salesperson there who had a new set of EKG electrodes that would save 80% of what we were spending for the 3M red dot electrodes that we'd been using. This manager, without talking with any of the clinicians or anybody else, decided that he could help save money by going to these new electrodes, and he on the spot placed an order and instantly replaced the 3M red dot electrodes with these new cheaper electrodes. These cheap electrodes worked just fine unless your patient was sweaty. And as those of you who are clinicians watching this video know, sweaty patients tend to be the sicker patients. So when they fall off on your sickest patients, paramedics got frustrated and they complained to the supply person, who told them, hey, look, I was told by management that we need to save money here. Consequently, we're going with these new electrodes and you'll just have to suck it up. The paramedics, being very concerned that they wanted to provide good care to patients, started stealing electrodes from the hospitals, the 3M red dot electrodes from the hospitals, so that they could have electrodes that would stick to sweaty patients who were sickest. And when one of them got caught at one of the hospitals, the charge nurse said, why are you stealing EKG electrodes? And the paramedic said, well, our company is in financial trouble and they've gone to these cheap ones and I want to take good care of patients. Please don't call the police on me. So that charge nurse called the CEO of the hospital, who called around to CEOs of 2 of the other hospitals in the county and said, have you experienced this? It sounds like our EMS system is in trouble. And the 3 CEOs went together to the county Board of Supervisors, which is the highest political organization in California counties, and said, hey, your EMS system is about to implode. We need to plan for an emergency takeover. So the first our leadership team got wind of this was the county CEO, who works for the Board of Supervisors, demanding an emergency meeting to be able to take over the EMS system because of our financial failure within the next 48 hours. Of course, we weren't financially failing. We were just doing some refinancing. Everything was fine in the system. But because of a little misunderstanding and a little system change, it cascaded through the entire process and almost caused us to lose the contract for the system. Fortunately, everything got straightened out, and the same service continues to provide EMS to that county 18 years after this particular incident. But it just shows you the importance of really thinking through your entire system before you make a significant change. The second lens that we're going to look at here is called understanding variation. And all systems and all processes have variation. The blood pressure that you had when you woke up this morning is not the same as the blood pressure that you have right now. Your pulse is not the same now as it was when you woke up this morning. It will be different when you go for a walk after watching this video. There's variation built into all kinds of processes, and understanding that is essential for effective leadership, particularly leadership for improvement. So we've all sat in meetings where there's been somebody who is usually a senior manager who is shown a table with some numbers on it, and they make little circles around those numbers. Now, the reason they make those circles is because they think there's something special about that number. They have decided that that number means something different than all the rest of the numbers around it. It is basically an assessment of variation, and if it's a bad number, they can be upset. If it's a good number, they can be excited. If it's going the wrong direction, they'll ask for explanations. And if you're in a position to do the same thing with numbers, it's really important that you understand how to identify whether a number really is special or not. This is the most important part of this presentation. If you take nothing else away from this video except for this one concept, this is it. Given 2 different numbers, one will be larger. Yes, I'll repeat that for you just in case you missed it. Given 2 different numbers, one will be larger. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. And I would bet money that within the last week, somebody has asked you a question or made a point based on 2 numbers that were different sizes, attributing special meaning to them where no special meaning really existed. So when we talk about monitoring data, performance data in an EMS system, the most important way to display it is to plot it in its naturally occurring time order. So on a chart like this will turn out to be a run chart. So you have your measure on the vertical axis and it's naturally occurring time order on the bottom. So whether it is by day, by week, by month, whatever it happens to be. No pie charts, no bar charts, no histograms. Don't need any of that kind of stuff. What we need is a run chart or possibly a control chart that it looks at the data in its naturally occurring time order. So, for example, this is a chart of data related to the time it took me to get from my house to the office when I lived in Clearwater, Florida. I lived in Clearwater, Florida. The office was in Largo. I rode my Harley 1200 Custom Sporty back and forth to the office. It was fun to do on Florida roads. And it took me on the average of about 30 minutes. So on day one, you can see here it took me 30 minutes. Day two, it was, I think it was 33 minutes. And you just plot the dots. And there is variation between these. But if somebody said, why on day 6 did it take you so much longer than day 7? I would come up with an answer, right? So would you. You would say, the lights, I caught all the lights red. There was extra traffic. I just didn't feel like driving as fast. You would come up with an explanation that was logical, rational, and completely made-up fallacy. It would be complete BS because this is what is referred to as common cause variation. Common cause variation is that variation that is inherent in all systems. It is that, remember that statement earlier that all systems are perfectly designed to produce the results they're getting? Well, the common cause variation is the results that they're getting within the system. So when you get common cause variation, the question you can ask as a leader is this performance good enough? Is this good enough for whatever it is that we're measuring? If we're measuring cardiac arrest resuscitation rates, if we're measuring response time performance, if we're measuring customer satisfaction, if we're measuring employee sick days, whatever it is the performance level good enough? And if the answer is yes, great, you can just continue monitoring it. If the answer is no, then in this case you need to work on changing the system and process to fundamentally produce sustainable improvement. Now, one morning I was driving to work and I approached an intersection and there was a little red Toyota pickup truck that ran the red light, a little Toyota pickup truck that ran the red light in front of me and was double broadsided. It was broadsided in both the driver door and the passenger door by vehicles coming from opposite directions. As I approached the driver in the injured vehicle, I could see that he was unconscious, unresponsive with deep respirations. I was able to reach my hand in and touch his chest, and I could feel the crepitus of a pneumothorax beginning. Could also reach down and feel that he had an angulation of his left thigh with a femur fracture. He was pinned in the vehicle, and he was wearing an EMT uniform. He was one of the people that worked on our team there at the local EMS system. So it was early morning rush hour traffic, very difficult traffic to get to a trauma center. So we activated the helicopter, Bay Flight here, and flew him to the trauma center. I flew part-time for Bay Flight and climbed on board the aircraft and flew into the hospital with him. Got him into the operating room to get his fractured pelvis externally fixated, his femur tractioned and pinned, and he had a chest tube for his pneumothorax. I talked to one of the sheriff's officers who gave me a ride back to my motorcycle, and you can see that on this particular day I had about a 2.5 hour trip to work instead of my normal 30-minute one, and that is called special cause variation, and that is variation that happens outside of the course of the normal process. With special cause variation, you can ask the question, what happened here? There's actually an answer for that particular variation. There are actually 9 different statistical tests of special cause variation. I'm going to walk you through 3 of them. One here is when you get an extraordinarily high or extraordinarily low point. In this case, this has been turned into a control chart, so you have an upper control limit here and a lower control limit here, within which the data is considered common cause variation. So when you get this extraordinary point here, it is a point that is above the upper control limit or below the lower control limit as a sign of special cause. Get you to ask that question, what happened here? If you get a series of 6 or more consecutively ascending or descending data points, 6 or more consecutively ascending or descending, you have what is called a trend. Don't use that trend line on Excel. That thing is a setup to make really bad assessments and bad decisions. I would just pretend it doesn't even exist. The last of the 3 signals for special cause is when you get a run of 8 or more consecutive points below or above the median. That signals a shift in the process, that the capability of the process has changed. So in this case, if you were looking to speed up your drive time to work and you made some changes, whether it was taking a different route or leaving an hour earlier or whatever fundamental change you made to your process, and you could see here that it produced the desired results. When you're doing performance improvement work, this is the kind of shift you're hoping to produce in your data to show that you've really made an improvement and made a real difference. So in this case, once you get a shift like that, you recalculate the central tendency line and the upper and lower control limits to show you the capability of the new process, which is the process here on the right side. So here's a couple of examples from real performance improvement projects. This one comes from Ventura County, California, project involving community paramedicine, where they worked to provide better care for patients who were under hospice care. When you sign up for hospice, you're told not to call 911, but we all know that some people panic and call 911 anyhow. And before the project started, 80% of hospice patients who had 911 activated on their behalf were transported. After training community paramedics as hospice providers to make them part of the hospice team, so they take their medical direction from the patient's hospice physician rather than the emergency medical physician who runs the rest of the county, we were able to drop the transport rate to 37% from 80%, which is a significant improvement in the care for these particular patients. Also in Ventura County, there was a project to decrease the suffering from patients who called 911, primarily pain-related. And you can see at the beginning of the project here, about 40% of patients who had demonstrated suffering had some relief from paramedic intervention, where after some intervention and some changes to dosing and medications and protocols, it went from 40% up to 55%, which is another statistically valid and significant improvement in their care. So the third of the lenses in the system of profound knowledge is called theory of knowledge. And it really has to do with predictions. And you want to be able to make good predictions and understand the kind of results they produce, and also be able to understand how to develop and test your theories about what you think will make things better. This is the model for improvement. Was created by a group called the Associates for Performance Improvement, based in Austin, Texas, and has been adopted by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement as their core framework for doing improvement work. And it basically has 3 questions. The first is what are we trying to accomplish, which is your aim. The second is how will we know that change is an improvement, which really talks about your measures. What will you measure to know whether or not something has gotten better? And then the third is what change can we make that will result in improvement? And this is really your theories about what you think will make things better. If we do this, then this is likely to result. And then once you've got your list of theories, you use the plan, do, study, act cycle at the bottom of the model here to test those changes to see if they actually produce the results you hope for. So this is the plan, do, test, or plan, do, study, act cycle. So this is the plan, do, study, act cycle for small fast tests of change. And the way you start this is you plan to try something. Say you're going to try changing your dosing of morphine from 2 to 4 milligrams to a weight-based dosing system. And your prediction is that that will relieve pain more effectively and decrease the number of times that you need to re-administer analgesics to patients with pain. Then you pick a single medic, maybe a single medic and a patient, and you try it. And you have that medic give a weight-based dosing of the morphine. And then when it comes to, that's where you do this, you gather data on your post-administration pain score and any other things you might learn. And then for the study phase, you basically compare the results of your test with your prediction and see whether or not it actually produced the results that you were hoping for. And based on that, that comparison, you'll decide, is this something I want to adopt because it works really well and I want to do more of it? Is something I need to adapt where, say, for example, the morphine made patients a little more nauseated, so your adaptation may be to pre-medicate them with ondansetron, Zofran, before giving the morphine to see if you can decrease the nausea in that process. Or if the results show, wow, this didn't work at all, you may want to abandon that entire theory and focus on something else. And basically, you do a series of these PDSA cycles until your degree of belief based on evidence in your own system is enough for you to be able to implement across your entire system. EMS has a horrible history of going from great idea to full-on implementation without doing testing in between. That's how we ended up with the mask suit. Those of you that are old enough to remember the mask suit. Those are interesting ideas that were fully implemented without being adequately tested. And the fourth and last of the lenses for the system of profound knowledge is the theory of psychology, and it has to do with interactions among people in the system and how relationships work. So this is your brainstem on a YouTube video here. Brainstem, if you'll remember right, is responsible for encouraging you to take a breath, regulating your temperature, and monitoring basic bodily functions in your system. The next part of your brain to evolve is the limbic system. This is the seat of all your emotions. So love, joy, happiness, anger, fear, guilt, frustration, all of these live in the limbic system. The neocortex is the active thinking part of your brain. It is where all your higher level cognitive processes happen, particularly in the prefrontal lobes of the neocortex. This is where your waking memory exists, whatever you're thinking about right this moment, right this exact moment, while you're watching this video is going on in the prefrontal lobes of your neocortex. Another part of your brain that is important for understanding relationships is your thalamus, and this essentially functions as the communication center for your brain. It takes in information from your optic nerve, your auditory nerve, your proprioception, your taste, your smell, all of your senses, and it distributes those messages to different parts of your brain for analysis and possible action. Sitting right next to the thalamus are two little almond-shaped pieces of neurologic tissue called the amygdala. Amygdala is Greek for almond, and it's almond-shaped, and the amygdala functions as your body's sentry. It's your body's guard. It is on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I know those of you who are watching have functioning amygdalas, because if you didn't, chances are you wouldn't be alive to watch the video right at this moment. So the amygdala basically scans everything that you see, hear, or smell, and it's asking three questions of everything it interacts with. Is this something I can mate with? Is this something I can eat? Or is this something likely to eat me? Is it likely to be my predator? So if it gets a no answer, it does nothing. If it gets a yes answer to say the can I mate with it question, it activates your limbic system and causes the emotions of love and joy and happiness. And that is also part of keeping our species alive, if you know what I mean. On the other hand, if it asks the question, is it going to eat me, and gets a yes, that's a signal that something's a predator, and it activates your old sympathetic nervous system. It's the nervous system that will respond with a fight, flight, or freeze response, so that you can deal with the situation and take care of things before they cause you real problems. So in this case, it was designed really when a hungry saber-toothed tiger was looking at you, and you noticed the tiger, and the goal was to either beat up the tiger or run away from the tiger and protect yourself. The problem is it hasn't fully evolved yet. So many of the people you work with will hear that you are going to go from the current shift schedule you're on to 10-hour shifts, and they will see that as a predator to their lifestyle and their system. If you say you're going to quit immobilizing people's spines because it actually is more harmful than helpful, and most people learned that spinal immobilization was essential to keep people from becoming paralyzed, they may perceive that as a threat and have their fight or flight system activated emotionally and push back and cause some resistance to some of the changes you want to implement. So when it comes to the psychology and working with people, I've heard a few speakers say this stuff would be easy if there were no people involved. If you've ever been one of those managers who said, we need to get buy-in from our folks, I would like to reframe that conversation. There are essentially 4 levels of employee involvement in a change effort. The lowest level is that of terrorists, somebody who's actively working to make sure that whatever it is you're trying to implement will not be successful. The next level up is buy-in. Somebody who's bought in, basically you get non-terrorism. You get somebody who is going to stand back and watch and see how it goes. You're not going to get their energy, you're not going to get their effort. And if you're trying to do something significant, something important, your chances of being able to do that with people who are just bought in are really low. The next level up is enrolled, and that literally means putting your name on the roll. There's an aspect of volunteerism where people are kicking in and giving you some of their energy to make things happen. And the highest level is that of commitment. And people who are committed, it's like, get the heck out of my way, we're going to make this work. And that is the level of involvement you need in order to be successful at implementing significant change and significant improvements as a leader. So when it comes to getting commitment, I find that people don't commit to my ideas no matter how bright they may be. You really need to have their real involvement in the situation in order to be able to effectively execute on your issue. Also, with all of the competing things that are trying to get people's attention in this day and age, when you're communicating information to folks, there's the rule of 7s, which means any new concept that you need to communicate to your team must be communicated 7 different times using 7 different mechanisms in order for 70% of your folks to have heard the message. So if you are going to be going to calling the hospital and talking with the physician on all refusals, and that's something new in your system, sending that out in an email, sending it out in posters that go on the walls in people's stations, having your field training officers talk with everybody on their shift about it, sending people a text, whatever your mechanisms of communication, go for 7 of them, and then hopefully you'll have 70% penetration. People need the ability to provide input, real contribution to the idea and how it evolves. And then you need a constant stream of information and feedback as people are taking action so they can adjust their performance so they know how things are going and can get back on track when they get a little bit off track. So that is, in a nutshell, the 4 lenses of effective leadership. Appreciation for a system, knowledge building, understanding variation, and psychology. And I do want to share with you one example of somebody who brought all 4 of these together in order to make a significant change. So this is Florence Nightingale, and you probably have heard of Florence Nightingale and think of her as one of the first nurses that ever existed in the world. And she certainly does get credit for that. But what many people don't know is that she was actually a performance improvement statistician. So she was one of the first people to really pioneer how to display data in a way that caused improvement. So being able to show the entire system, share her theories about what things needed to improve, deal with the psychology and emotions of the folks who needed to be able to take action on it, and being able to display it in such a way that it took into account the natural variation in the system and process. So she was working with the British military. They were involved in a conflict in India, and they had a number of soldiers die. And so this is a star chart over here that shows the data from April 1854 through March of 1955, 12 months worth of data on soldier fatalities. So the red bar are people who died from wounds. So gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or shrapnel wounds from explosion were in the red. In the brown are people who died from other things like falling off a cliff or having a carriage run over them or something like that. And the light blue here are the soldiers that died as a result of poor hygiene and poor sanitation for the living conditions and the food prepared by the soldiers. And you can see that poor hygiene and poor living conditions accounted for significantly more, close to 80% of the deaths for soldiers in this conflict. Florence Nightingale thought this was inappropriate and showed this graph to the British government and made a suggestion about how to invest money to improve hygiene for these soldiers. She was successful at getting the financing for that, and you can see over here on the left in the 12 months that followed the initial set there. You can see here in April, May, and June, you can see that the number of deaths due to hygiene just decreased dramatically, and that in fact there were thousands of soldiers whose lives were saved through her intervention and that process using all of the lenses of improvement. So with that, we will...
I would love to take your questions, comments, quips, quotes, small speeches. All you need to do is to raise your hand here if you want, and we will happily unmute you, or you can type a question in the chat box. What questions do you have, folks?
Thanks, Mike. While we're waiting for any questions here, I just want to say thanks for doing that presentation. Also, you could easily do a presentation just simply on the theory of psychology. That was fascinating, and love to hear more about that in the future.
Absolutely.
Todd, do we have... I have a minimized screen here. I have to open it up. Do we have any hands raised yet?
I'm looking. I don't see any hand raised yet.
Yeah, we do not. You know what I might suggest, Mike, unless you think you're going to go back to your slides, is that we go back to the main window.
There's one. Okay.
Oh, you got one. Okay.
Charlene, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question.
What's your question, Charlene?
It is, I don't know if you've heard, I think it's called the long tail theory of change. It's got something to do with the long tail. Have you heard about that?
Long tail theory of change. I do not believe I have. What do you know about it?
Okay, well, it's hard to ask a question if you haven't heard about it, and I'm not even sure if it's a theory of change, but let me tell you just briefly. The concept, I think it comes from McKinsey, so they're, I don't know if you know about them, but they're like a group of consultants, business.
I'm very familiar with McKinsey and Company, yes.
Okay, so McKinsey was on about this long tail, and the theory was more or less what you do with your data is you look at the places where you have the outliers, if you want. So in a bell curve, those things that are on, either side of the variation. The long tail is at one end. You're getting something going on, and their theory is that if you move that, if you can affect change of those outliers, you're going to actually be able to influence how well the whole data set does. And when I looked at it, I was really not convinced. And it just seems to go against what you're saying with, like, I really loved the statistical things that you were doing as far as affecting change and looking at how to approach data. But it really seems to go against this concept of look at those outliers and look at what's happening irregularly and really focus on your change efforts on what's happening regularly.
But
so I guess there's no question, but just a comment.
Well, actually, I think so. I've not heard it referred to as the long tail, but if you look at a normal standard deviation, if the right side is your good performance and the left side is your bad performance. I've certainly looking at the right side of really successful performance, whether it is people or divisions or aspects of your organization, looking at that long tail to see what they're doing differently to develop your theories of change that you can use to change the whole system. I actually don't believe that if that's what the long tail theory that McKinsey is talking about is, which is, I've not heard of the phrase long tail before, but I certainly understand looking at the right side of a bell-shaped curve in your standard deviation. That getting ideas from what's really successful and trying to expand those more back toward the center to move the entire bell-shaped curve to the right. I don't think that's in conflict actually at all with the model for improvement we just talked about. It's just it's a different way to get ideas for how to make substantial improvement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for that insight. That's helpful in thinking about it.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions while I've got you unmuted here?
Oh, I also wanted to bring up the concept of, piloting or testing. You're so right that what we do, not just in EMS, but we seem to have a real propensity for it, is to have a great idea and go 100% behind it and implement. And then we're, stuck with incremental change after that to try to get it to what we hoped it would be to begin with. But I don't know, any insight, any thoughts on how to convince our colleagues that piloting and small change and testing to see if our thoughts are on target, how do we convince the rest of us that that's a great idea? Knowing that, that when there's a political window open, you just want to jump in and implement.
That is a really good question. There's no one way that works for all people that you're trying to convince. One thing I've had pretty good success with is I'll just jump in and grab the people who aren't skeptical and say, let's try one test of change. So when we were looking at reducing suffering improvement, reducing patient suffering more effectively in San Mateo County, one of our theories was to change our analgesic dose from 2 to 4 milligrams of morphine to a weight-based dose of morphine. So rather than dealing with all the skeptics, I had one paramedic I knew was open to ideas, and I asked her to do the weight-based dose on the next patient she had and just describe what happened. And we made a one-patient PDSA test. And then we shared the results of that. And it worked out well. The patient got much better relief, didn't need repeat dose of morphine. So we had her station, so the 3 other medics at her station tried it for 1 day. And what we found was that we were making people nauseated. So in our plan, do, study, act phase, in the act phase, we made an adaptation where we would pre-medicate patients with Zofran before giving them the weight-based dosing of morphine, and tried that, and were able to dramatically decrease people's pain, decrease the need for redosing of analgesic, and didn't make people nauseated. And so based on that, we were able to spread it and implement it system-wide. And when we started the spreading process, we were able to show the learning that we'd done, and people were like, wow, I wouldn't even have thought to try it and test it. And after doing a number of those kind of small tests like that, we basically kind of got it hardwired into the culture where people would come up with an idea and they'd say, well, what's the smallest, fastest PDSA we can try on that? It seemed to help. I don't know if that's useful to you.
That is, yeah, I like the insight. I'm glad I tuned in. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It's Todd. And, Charlene, the other thing that I would say is that, every time, once Mike finally convinced me of this after years and years and probably decades of arguing about it, when I have talked to people about it, part of what I do is I ask them if they've implemented something system-wide that didn't work out. And every EMS person that I know who's, been in leadership longer than about a day and a half has experience with that, either because they did it and it didn't work out, or because more often something was rolled out while they were a medic that was obviously dumb from the medic's perspective, but it took a while to figure out that it was a failure, or maybe they never did. And so once I get them to tell me about their own system rollout, or a system rollout they were the victims of, that was a failure, it reminds them that this is actually better. And especially if they're in charge of it. And what I always say is, honestly, just from my own perspective, is I would rather only look stupid to a small number of people rather than to my entire department. And once we do roll something out, to have tweaked it enough to make it work, or give up on it because it was really, truly a fantastically dumb idea, it works better as well. And I find that people all can so far can all relate to that, either aspect of it, and it tends to go pretty well. You'll see a light come on in people's eyes where they have done something where they had to admit, boy, this was really dumb, and they all kind of see it in their head while I'm talking about it. Does that make sense?
It scares me, but yes, thank you. It scares me because, I can see that when you put somebody in that position and they come out with the truth, and they still want to go for that whole hog system implementation, when you get to saying, how many people do you want to look stupid in front of, that's the part where I'm afeared. But thank you. It's all very helpful.
Yeah, what's the thing that the change only happens when the fear of the present is greater than fear of the future, something like that.
And just for me, I've decided to look stupid in front of lots of people all the time, so it takes that pressure off. Good. So we're coming up at 9:56. Anyone else have any other questions? Ken, any thoughts?
No, nothing. I'm good. Any questions posted to the chat room?
None in the chat. Todd did include a link to the long tail that Charlene mentioned. So I encourage people to click on that and check out that website.
Okay. Well, I think then we'll call this a wrap, and I want to just thank everybody involved with today's webcast. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Todd. And for those of you who may never have heard this before, every single one of these webcasts is made available. We do archive it on our PCC website, so you can watch it over and over and over again for years to come. And that's made available through Todd Stout and his team over at FirstWatch, and by Carrie Anderson of Virtual Inch, who's our webmaster. Want to also ask everybody to be sure to visit our website. Use the website. It's there for you, and there are great things on that website. And you can also learn about future webcasts and upcoming events and breaking news and all sorts of other cool stuff. And if you get a chance, if you're into Facebook, be sure to like us on Facebook as well. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. And we will sign off for now. And hopefully we'll be able to meet again in the next month or two with another webcast. And until then, lead well.